What the heck?
What came out of nowhere? What the hell? I'm being recorded. I'm scared. It's cold. I don't want your whole drink. After I tried to drink, you buy your legs and throw you on the ground like little soup. Thank you. Alright, I'm gonna give you about 1 more minute to do the bell work.
What's today?
This is the second. All right, let's go with it. Okay, so we want back
completely, what do I do first?
Split it up. Don't you do?
Greatest common factor, what is it?
2.
2y, perfect. 2y. Remember, you have to check the numbers and you have to check the variables, okay? All right, so we divide 2y out of both of them. So the 2's will cancel, the y's will cancel, we'll have x squared. A divided by 2 is 4, the y's will cancel, so we'll have 4x. And 6 divided by 2 is 3, and the y's will cancel. Okay, can I factor it anymore? No? You guys are telling me I can't factor this? Okay, if we were to try to factor this, what would I do first? Perfect. Multiply 3, and what's the coefficient here? 1. So we're going to have 3. We need 2 factors of 3 that add up to be 4. What are they?
3 and 1.
3 and 1. All right, so now, what do I do with this information? I want to split the middle term, so I'm going to rewrite this. Don't forget we have 2y being multiplied to it. So this is going to be x squared plus 3x plus 1x plus 3. Do you remember this? So this is the exact same thing as this. We just split this up into 3 and 1. Okay. Now why did we do that? What's our next step?
Split them.
Perfect. We want to factor by grouping. Okay. All right. So we want to factor the greatest common factor out of these two. What is it?
1.
1 and what else?
X.
X. Perfect. So we can just factor a 1x or x out of that. Remember, it's still being multiplied by 2y. Okay. All right, so we're going to have x plus 3 left over. We divide both of those by x. What about over here? What's the greatest common factor?
1.
1. Perfect. So x plus 3. And what is the last step?
After x plus 3.
Yeah, factor out x plus 3. So remember, we still have this 2y being multiplied to it. So it'll be 2y times x plus 3 times everything we have left, which is x plus 1. All right, so last thing we could do is check our factors. If we were to FOIL this, then we should end up here. So this would be x squared plus 1x plus 3x, which would be this, plus 3. And then we'd end up here. We could simplify it to this and then distribute, simplify back to this. Okay? So if you want to check your factors, we can go do the whole process backwards. All right. Any questions on this? Just kind of refresh you on factoring. Okay, perfect. All right, hopefully everybody got the notes. Today we're talking about perfect square trinomials. Okay. Our objective is over there on the board. It's to be able to identify and factor perfect square trinomials. All right. Does anybody remember this term from Module 7?
Yeah.
We did these in Module 7. What do they look like? Perfect square trinomials. They are polynomials. Anything significant about them? They do have 3 terms because they're trinomials. What else? Does anyone remember what's significant about perfect square trinomials? Yeah, they're perfect squares. Basically, they're perfect squares, okay? And we're going to see what those look like. So the first thing on your notes, perfect square trinomials are the product of a binomial that is squared. Okay? So what's a binomial?
2 polynomials.
Two-
2 monomials.
Yeah, 2 terms or 2 monomials. Good job. All right, so in a perfect square trinomial, the first term is a perfect square. Okay? What is a perfect square? Can anybody remind me?
4 sides are the same.
What was that?
4 sides are the same.
4 sides that are the same, like a square. All right, what about a number?
Even?
It doesn't necessarily have to be even.
4.
A perfect square.
4.
It has to. 4 is a perfect square. Why?
That's 4 sides.
4 sides?
No.
Oh.
I like you guys are thinking though. This is perfect square root. 4, yes. Perfect square root. So a number that is a perfect square has a square root that is a whole number. So if you take the square root of it and it's a decimal, it's not a perfect square. Okay? Good job. All right, so the last term is also a perfect square. So the first term and the last term have to be perfect squares. And then the middle term is twice the product of the square roots of the first and last terms. So I know that this sounds like what the heck, but we're going to see examples of it and it's going to make more sense. Okay? And we're going to be using these formulas. Do these look familiar to you guys?
No.
No? We did these in Module 7, okay? We used this formula to multiply it out, but this time we're going to be factoring it to this, okay? All right. Okay, so the next thing, we're going to talk about identifying them, okay? So we have to follow those 3 characteristics, all right? The first term has to be a perfect square, the second term, or the last term has to be a perfect square. This term has to be 2 times the square root of this times the square root of this, okay? So we're looking at x squared plus 8x plus 16. Does x squared have a perfect square? Is it a perfect square? Yeah, what's the square root of x squared? X, perfect. What about 16? Is that a perfect square? Is it a perfect square? 4. Yeah, it has the square root of 4. All right, so is this 2 times 4 times x? What's 2 times 4? 8 times x is 8x. So yes, this is a perfect square trinomial, okay? So you can write yes in your notes.
That's what it said for.
All right, what's the factored form? How can we factor this?
Like terms?
Yeah, greatest common factor first. Does it have one?
8. 1.
Can we divide all of them by 8?
No, 1
No.
more.
So it has to just be 1, so we can't really factor anything out of it. Okay, what's our next step to factor this? What's the next step to factor this? This is like what we did in the bell work, right? Yeah, we can do it like that. So we could factor by grouping, or we could just write factors like this, okay? Because we don't have a coefficient here. So x squared is just x and x, right? What are 2 factors of 16 that add up to be 8?
You said 1 4.
2 factors of 16 that add up to be 8. What multiplies to be 16 but adds up to be 8?
4, 4?
Yeah, 4 and 4. And they're both plus, because both of these are plus signs, okay? All right, so would everybody agree that this is the same thing as x plus 4 squared?
No.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, right? You're fine. Do you guys remember multiplying these and everybody would forget and just do x squared plus 16? But it's really this. It's x plus 4 times x plus 4. Okay? Because whenever you're squaring something, you're timesing it by itself. Right? So perfect square trinomials will always factor into something like this. Okay? Both of their binomial factors are exactly the same. So we're going to have some binomial that is squared. Does that make sense? So after you determine that it's a perfect square trinomial, it's super easy to factor because all you have to do is take the square root of this one, that's our first term, and then the square root of this one, that's our second term. And then you just have to determine the sign. And then you're done. No factor by grouping, no really multiplying anything, okay? It's super easy. You guys are going to love it. Any questions on that? Okay. All right, what about this one? X squared minus 8x plus 25. Is that a perfect square trinomial? Why not?
We can't put anything into anything.
Okay, so let's check our characteristics. Is the first term a perfect square?
Yeah.
Yeah, is the last term a perfect square?
No. Wrong things? Yeah. So 5 times 5.
Yeah, so it is a perfect square. So the last thing we have to check is the middle term, okay? Is this the same thing as 2 times x times 5?
No.
No, so what would this middle term have to be in order for this to be a perfect square?
A 5.
Close.
4, 3, 2, 1. 10.
10. How'd you get 10?
5 and 5.
5 times 2 times x, but yeah. Okay. We're basically doing, if we were to expand it, like this one is 4 plus 4, so it's 8. So this would be 5 plus 5, so it should be 10. Okay. All right, so no, this is not a perfect square triangle. And we can't even factor this. There aren't any factors of 25 that are going to give us 8. So it's prime. All right, any questions on that? Nothing new, guys, okay. Okay. Moving on. Okay, so we're just going to identify these, all right, and then we're going to talk more about factoring them. Okay, so is this a perfect square trinomial? So the first term has a perfect square, the last term has a perfect square. Is the middle term 2 times the square root of this times the square root of that? What's the square root of x? X. So, I don't want to write it down because I have to put. So the square root of x is x. What's the square root of 4?
4.
4? I mean,
2.
2. Yes, it is 2. Okay, so 2 times x times 2 is 4x. So this is a perfect square trinomial. Does that make sense? Okay. What about this one? We know x squared has a perfect square root. What about this one? If you don't know for sure, you can type in your calculator. What's the square root of 169? Is it a whole number?
I can give you the 1.
What?
I give you the 1.
When Brody gets back. Does anybody want to check for me? Square root of 169?
Loading.
Said what?
No, it's not.
Square root of what?
169.
It's 84.5.
I don't know if you told me right.
Why is it divided by 2?
That's not square root. Square root.
Basically,
No,
what it is.
Square root of
169.
169. It's that little. Yeah, it's still left. Okay, do you guys remember what the square root symbol looks like?
Oh, I remember.
It looks like this.
If my number goes
Yeah, 13. So it's 13, okay?
Oh.
All right,
Yeah.
so now the square root of 13 times x times 2, is that going to give us 26x?
Yes.
Yeah, so that is a perfect square trinomial. Yes. Okay. What about this one? X squared is a perfect square. What about 36? Yeah. Okay, so it's 2 times 6 times x, then x. No, so that is not a perfect square trinomial. All right, what about this one? We know x squared has a perfect square. What about 9? 3. Yeah. It is 2 times x times 3. 6x. Yeah, this. That's okay if it's negative. So we do have a formula that takes the negative into account. It would have to be a negative 3 and a negative 3. Just think about negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. But negative 3 plus negative 3 is negative 6. Does that make sense? If you have a negative plus a negative, it's still a negative. Okay, any questions on those? Identifying them? Okay, so they just have to cover those 3 characteristics. All right, so we're going to talk about factoring. This is going to be the easiest factoring you will ever do. It is the best, okay?
You say that like every time.
No, but this is real. I think so. I just really like factoring, so I think it's all great. But this is super easy. Like you're gonna fly through your assignment today. Okay? So
Is
just
it
like
online or
every other
paper?
factoring, both. We're gonna have to factor out the greatest common factor if possible. That's always gonna make it easier. Okay? The next step, we have to determine if the trinomial is a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so what are the qualifications that it has to have? What terms have to be perfect square root? Yes, the first term has to be a perfect square and the last term has to be a perfect square. And the middle term has to be twice the product of the square roots of the first and last term. Okay, we have to do 2 times square root of the first term, square root of the last term. All right, so if it is a perfect square, then we can factor using these formulas. So remember, these are the formulas we used to multiply them out when we were working with special case polynomials. Here's the -1. If we have a negative, then this ends up being a negative. Okay. All right, cool. So let's do some examples. This is the fun stuff. All right, so the whole trick with these are all going to be perfect square trinomials. Okay. The trick with these is to find the square root of the first term. So square root of x squared is what? X, it's just x. Okay, now we want to find the square root of the last term. What's the square root of 49? 7, okay? All right, so now this is just going to look like x. We have to look at our signs next. Those are both pluses. So it'll be x plus 7 squared. We're done. Yep.
That's it.
I told you, it's the
That doesn't
best.
make sense.
So what happens
It's
if
not-
it?
okay.
Watch, she don't add fractions in like a week, bro.
Oh, well, not today.
See,
Oh, so you are.
see, look.
Okay, I don't think we're going to be working with fractions. I honestly don't think fractions will be on the test. Anyway, so the reason why this works, remember when we did the last one and we factored it all out? You have to find two numbers that multiply to be 49 and add to be 14. That's 7 and 7, right? So that's why it ends up being x plus 7 times x plus 7, which is the same thing as x plus 7 squared. Does that make sense?
No.
So it's super easy, right? Okay. So this one, very first we have to factor out the greatest common factor. What is it?
2x.
2x, yeah, you rolled 2x. So it's 2x cubed divided by 2x.
X squared.
X squared, good job. Okay, now it's negative 24 x squared divided by 2x. Negative 12x. Now what's 72x divided by 2x?
36.
Plus 36. Okay. So now this is going to be a perfect square trinomial. Okay. So all we have to do is take the square root of x squared, which is what? X. The square root of 36, which is what? 6. Okay. So we have 2x. Don't forget about that being multiplied. And our factor is just going to be x minus, whenever this has a minus sign right here and a plus sign right here, it's going to be minus 6 squared. Okay? And think about it. Negative 6, if we had x minus 6 times x minus 6, negative 6 times negative 6 is 36. Negative 6 plus negative 6 is negative 12. Does that make sense? So that's it. It's that easy. You just have to take the square root. After you factor out the GCF, you just have to take the square root of the first and last term, plug it in,
So you
and determine your sign.
How do you determine?
The sign?
Yeah.
So if they're both positive, then it's just going to be positive.
Yeah.
If the first one's negative and the second one's positive, it's going to be negative.
So it's whatever the first one is.
But if this one is negative, it is not a perfect trinomial. If you're working on the polynomial, this is negative. Definitely not a perfect trinomial. All right. Questions so far? Nothing? Yeah. So I want you to do this one by yourself. X squared plus 10x plus 25. I'll give you 1 minute. If you're seeing the pattern here, then you should just be able to write down the answer like that.
Yeah, look at so. Can I get one?
All right, let's go over it. Okay, Austin, what's the square root of x squared? X, what's the square root of 25? 5. Okay, so what does our factor look like? Our factors.
X plus 5 squared.
That's it. Did everybody get that?
Yeah.
Perfect. Too easy, right? It's like the best factor in the world. Okay, so this one's a little bit different, so I'm going to go through this one with you. Okay? But it's the same process, okay? We're going to take the square root of the first term. Well, first of all, do I have anything I can factor out of them? No? Okay. So the square root of 9x squared, what is that?
Yeah, I think 3.
Perfect. 3x. Too easy. All right, the square root of 4 is what? 2. 2? So what do you guys think our factor will look like?
3.
That's it. 3x plus 2. So the only difference here is we have a number out in front of x. Okay? So that's just going to make us have a number in front of x in our factor, but if it is a perfect square root, then it's fine. Does that make sense? For sure. Okay. All right. Perfect. Am I good to move on?
Yeah.
All right, the last couple of examples. Okay, so very first step, what do you guys think we should do here? Yeah, which is 3x. Okay, so 3x cubed divided by 3x. X squared. Negative 12x squared divided by 3x. Negative 4x. 12x divided by 3x. Okay. All right, so now this is a perfect square trinomial. We already know that. Okay, so what are my factors here? Okay, so is it plus? Yeah, it has to be minus. So, squared, okay? Or, wait a minute, I made a mistake. Is it 4? There we go, it's 2. Perfect. Because it's the square root, right? It's the square root of the last one, 2. Squared. That looks better. Because negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. Negative 2 plus negative 2 is negative 4. All right, does that make sense? All right, so you gotta watch those negatives. If this one's negative, then your factor has to be negative. Okay, I want you guys to try the last one by yourself. I'll give you about 1 minute. Remember, factor out GCF, and then factor the rest of it. All right, are you ready to go over this one? Okay, so very first step. Yeah, factor out 4x. So we have x squared minus 4x plus 4. Now what? Yeah, this is exactly the same as that one. So it's just x minus 2 squared. Perfect, that's it. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions on that? Okay, so I have a worksheet for you, and you have to do the online assignment. But what I want to do is I want to make sure that everybody gets done with this worksheet, so we're going to do it together and we're going to do it in chunks.
Okay, I like this idea.
Alright, so I'm gonna pass it out. I'm gonna give you guys,
Freeze time.
I don't know, should we say 5 minutes? I want you to do the first 4 by yourself. I'll give you like 5 minutes on it, and then we'll go over them, okay? These are super easy.
They're not super easy.
I think you're gonna be able to fly through them. Yeah, if you just want to cruise through, that's fine. It's just about recognizing the patterns, and once you guys see it, you'll be like, oh, too easy. Okay, so these are all factorable. It says on the top they're all factorable, so they're not going to be any prime. I've done all of them. You don't have a greatest common factor in any of them. Okay. The online assignment, you probably will have a greatest common factor in some of those when you do that one, but this one, you don't have any greatest common factors in them. But we know that they're all factorable, so they're all perfect square trinomials. Okay. So the trick here is all you have to do is take the square root of the first term, take the square root of the second term, determine if it's a plus or minus, and then just throw in your numbers. That's all you have to do. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to pull up the assignment. So I'll give you, is 5 minutes enough time? Is that too much
I don't
time?
know.
I'll give you, we'll try 5 minutes. Try to get the first 4 done.
The Wi-Fi isn't working.
You know, if I-
Yeah, the Wi-Fi hasn't been working.
The online?
Yeah. it
Okay, well then work
sucks.
on this. We're doing it together. Put your Chromebooks away and let's do this. On this assignment, I won't be too strict about the work because I feel like there isn't a whole lot of work. So basically, times itself will equal 16. And then this one will just be. So this is the same thing as 4x plus 5 times 4x plus 5 into all multiply. If you were to multiply that out, you'd get it. You multiply by 4x times 4x, which would be 16x squared. Then you multiply 4x by 5, which would be 20x, and then 5 times 4x would be 20x, and then 5 times 5 would be 20x. So that is 40x. Yes, but the square root of 16 is 4.
gonna take one of these. I got 3 of them.
Oh.
And can I go to the restroom? I gotta go with my nose.
Yeah.
I actually know how to do something in this class now.
Usually don't have to try. Okay. Are we good to go over the first four?
Yeah.
Some of you are just flying through them. Okay. So what's the square root of 16?
4x.
Yeah, 16x would be 4x. What's the square root of 25?
5
And is it plus or minus?
plus.
Squared. Okay, so somebody asked me a really good question. If I'm squaring this, where does the middle term even come from? What about the 40x? Can anybody tell me? So 4x plus 5 squared is the same thing as 4x plus 5. Is that correct? Yeah. So how would you square this? How would we get from here to here? Yes, you multiply both of these terms to both of these terms. So this would be 16x squared. 4 times 5 would be 20x. 5 times 4x, oh I put 2, 20x, 20x, and then 5 times 5 would be 25. What's 20x plus 20x? 40x. So does that make sense how this works out? Okay. All right, perfect. What about this one?
6b minus 11 squared.
11, all squared. Perfect. Because the square root of 36b squared is 6b. Square root of 121 is 11, and it's a negative right here, so it's negative. All right, this one?
Do you want the answer or you want my first? Just say the answer.
You can just tell me the answer.
11m minus 9.
Perfect. This one?
7p minus 2 squared.
Perfect. All right, let's try the next four. I'll give you another 5 minutes. If you finish with it, if you're just cruising through it and you're done, you can go through the half again. And then just get started on my assignment. Perfect. What's that question?
Oh, I've heard it. Never mind.
So the online one is 8.05. I believe it's only 5 questions.
Yeah, it doesn't load, and then once it loads, it doesn't let you submit because it takes forever to load.
Oh, great. That's awesome.
The Wi-Fi's like that or something.
Okay, well, you might have to do it at home. But it's only 5 questions, and most of you are doing these in way less than a minute a question.
Let's go. I want to do Spanish.
The second.
Well, what if I want to? Oh, okay. Well, if it's not loading, I'll go with it. I still expect you to do it, but
I'll do it at some point. It's gonna be quiet. I'll do that something.
yes. Here, here's ready to do the next 4.
Yes.
The
The only thing to finish is right now.
Okay, number 5.
10b minus 9.
Perfect.
5x plus 11 squared. 5a minus 8 or 4. 12x plus 11 squared.
You guys are quick with your square roots. Oh, we only did 4. Okay, I'll give you 5 minutes to do the next part.
I'll second.
No, it's okay, Austin. It's okay. I missed the rest. You guys presented. Yeah.
So now the 125.
You're going to speak.
This pencil is easy.
Good.
I'll turn it in.
Yeah. If you're done, raise your hand.
Yeah, oh my god.
I told you this was going to be the easiest factoring. How long
Can
are
we just do this for the rest of the school year?
Yeah.
One thing I
Only
understand.
factor per
Yes,
square
only
meter.
this exact one.
Just make it bigger
I
numbers.
wish.
The only one I actually understand.
So we're
What
like,
if
we
I
have to like
threw
do
in
it
like
twice.
multiple variables, threw in some y's in there?
Yes.
That wouldn't be that bad, right?
Yeah, this is on the test wrong past. Oh my god,
I'm not actually getting a big test.
But it's not gonna be the only thing, right?
This will be the easiest one.
Okay, are you guys ready to go over the next ones?
Yeah.
I don't think that was 5 minutes, but I feel like 52 minutes there. Which one are we on, 9?
9, so it'd be 6x plus 5 squared.
It's minus.
Or it'd be a minus
Yeah, watch those signs.
Shut up.
It's 2a.
That's okay though, common mistake.
2a
Minus
minus 9.
Perfect. R squared.
5k minus 3 squared. R minus 11 squared.
Perfect. Alright, I'll give you time to do the next
Right.
one.
I know for real.
Why do you do this beginning of the year?
Yeah.
Well,
The beginning
can't
of the
only
year.
do
I
this.
wasn't even here. I don't even need my paper. I didn't pay attention.
Wait here.
Okay, do you want more time to work on the next ones?
No.
So now we're on 13. Alright, these are the last ones, okay?
2n minus 7 squared. 10 minus 3 squared. 11n minus 5 squared. And then x plus 12 squared. Brain's good at that.
It's the only thing I'm good at. You gotta take
Okay,
it
so
away from
would you
me.
be able to do this if we had greatest common factors that we had to factor out first?
What?
That's what I was talking about.
Oh, what'd you say?
Would you be able to do it if I had a greatest common factor that I had to factor out first
Probably.
and then do this? Yeah.
Very small factor is not hard to do.
Yes, you're right. Okay, any questions on this? Alright, then I'll let you on your own for the online assignments. Is it working now?
No, the Wi-Fi's still stuck.